Friends, good news! A brand new, more powerful Porsche convertible has turned up on our doorstep. The 2015 Porsche Boxster GTS. Bad news, in my quest to do my job diligently for you fine folks, I spent perhaps just a wee bit too much time with the roof down. And where a couple of days ago I looked like the color of this car, today I look like an extra from The Walking Dead. So first things first, the Boxster GTS does indeed produce more horsepower, and I would love to show you the engine, but even with the frunk and the boot open, there is no way we're going to see it because the engine lives sort of here. So let's go over some of the bullets and numbers. That is a 3.4-liter Boxster engine, much like the one that is in the Boxster S. And just a side note here, Boxster engine, Roadster, kind of get the name all the way back to 1996. But I digress. So this engine here puts out 330 horsepower. So for you Boxster S aficionados, that is 15 extra horsepower. And it comes in at a relatively aggressive 6,700 RPM. Now, an interesting side note, that same engine in a Cayman GTS puts out 10 more horsepower at 340. So the torque, 273 pound-feet of torque. That is 7 over a Boxster S, and that comes at an also relatively aggressive 4,500 RPM and stays flat all the way up to 5,800 RPM. Now, the obvious question here is, how does effectively the same engine produce more power? Well, that's where we get into the GTS spec. There's more stuff here that's fitted as standard, and the most important thing we need to pay attention to now is the sport exhaust. The engine with the sport exhaust has a special tune to it to get the extra power. But wait, there's more. If you were to look at the front of a Boxster S, you would see one radiator here and another radiator here. In a Boxster GTS, you get a third radiator for increased breathing. Okay, if we're all being honest with one another, not exactly the most horsepower we've seen, especially over the past like 30 days. You know, we've been driving 600 horsepower cars that literally slap you in the face with power. I mean, forget about slap, they just punch you in the face with so much power. This one's a little bit more gentle. 330 horsepower it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. Now, we talked about this in that Z episode, but let me put this in a different way of comparison. That AMG GLE 63 coupe we drove, this car weighs over 2,000 pounds less. That is why this car has more than enough horsepower. Okay, that's fine and good and all, but what about the torque, the pulling power? And that's where things are a bit different. 273 pound-feet of torque. When we get below 300, that's when you're like, that's a question mark. But this, significantly different by design. So this is a Boxster engine, so it's flat, the pistons go out, basically on its side. So by design, you need to put your foot into these things to get power out of them. I don't care if you're in a Porsche or a Subaru, that's just the way these things work. And number one, that makes it for a lot more fun, so you get plenty of pulling power with this thing. I mean, after all, the thing only weighs 3,100 pounds even with the PDK. But then there's another piece of that work in the engine that comes into a bit of a benefit, and that is this button here. Remember, this car comes with the sport exhaust as standard. So that translates to downshift. You get a much more exciting exhaust. Even when you're driving around town, it's a deeper, throatier exhaust, even at lower RPMs. But when you're, oh my God, listen to that. I could listen to that all day. Oh, do you hear that echo back there? That is why you want a GTS. So there are a number of upgrades to the GTS, like for example, the front end is different, and to my eye, it completely transforms the look of this car for the positive. Some other changes are the headlights, they steer, something you normally don't get in other Boxsters and is very cool. But as cool as that is, we are car guys. We like talking about the mechanical bits. So what are some of the changes to the mechanical stuff? Well, there are some things that are fitted as standard here that are optional to other Porsche ranges, like Porsche Active Stability Management System. Say that one fast 3 times. Basically what that is an adjustable suspension system. It also changes the ride height of the car, which I would argue is one of the main reasons why this car looks so mean over other Boxsters. But I digress. The other reason why this looks mean is the wheels. Now granted, these are the turbo wheels. They are indeed optional, and we will cover them in a coming episode of the options game. You definitely don't want to miss that one. But even the wheels that are fitted as standard to a GTS are 20 inches, and it's also a lower profile tire that is fitted as standard as well. Now there is one other item that is fitted as standard here that transforms the performance of the car, and that is the very cool item we always look forward to in Porsche, and that is the Sport Chrono package. So those are a lot of disparate bits that make up the GTS spec, but how does it translate out here on the road? Well, if you've been paying attention thus far, the general theme with the GTS is there's a lot more control and a lot more adjustments over the drive dynamics. Now, before we unpack said drive dynamics, let's just get something right out from the gate here. This isn't a case where you have squat, dive, pitch, or roll. I mean, this thing, it only weighs 3,100 pounds, and that's with the PDK. The PDK itself is what, 67 or 70 pounds? And that's only 100 pounds over just a box standard Boxster. So the weight and the way the thing is set up, oh, listen to that. Oh, Santa Maria, Madre Dios. But we're gonna go over now to this side and interrogate the sport mode. And what that does, it changes the throttle mapping. Then we change the suspension. Now, obviously, right out of the box, this thing sits lower than a regular Boxster S. And I feel like when I say there's a suspension adjustment here, it's like I'm splitting hairs. We go from almost no squat, dive, pitch, or roll to virtually no squat, dive, pitch, or roll. Now, it would stand to reason if you're going to spend all this time making the outside of the car look special, even the bits underneath special, you would want to do the same to the interior. So open the door, and the first thing you notice is lots of Alcantara on the seats, the door panels, the dashboard, and my favorite, the steering wheel. But I would say equal to that in importance are the seats, and I don't mean the embroidery on the headrest, I mean the seats themselves. These are the sport seats. This is what's fitted to the GTS as standard. This is something you would find in other Porsches as optional. Now granted, this car here, serial 106, it is fitted with more adjustments as options, and we are going to cover that in a round of the options game, so make sure you come back for that. But to accompany the seats, you have fancier seatbelts with a red trim on the edge here. But if I'm being honest, I would much prefer the full-on red seatbelts. Remember those yellow seatbelts we had in the 911 a couple of years ago? Now, while we're on the topic of color, my absolute favorite change here is the face of the tachometer. Ist rot. Now let's go to Sport Plus. And in Sport Plus, this is where all of that goes to another level. So again, we change the throttle mapping and the transmission mapping. Like, you try to drive this thing around town in Sport Plus, it's almost annoying. Like, the gear changes are like above 4,000 RPM in some cases. Granted, very cool to impress the ladies, but this is much more fun out here. The suspension gets stiffer. The spoiler in the back, instead of being speed activated, it is fixed in the up position. In the 911 Turbo S film, we talked a lot about that Sport Chrono, so you can go back and check that out. But in summary, the engine mounts are adjustable. I know, very cool, which makes the whole car stiffer, which makes it handle better, and on straights it also makes it faster. Like, to the point where you read the numbers on this thing, and Porsche says, oh yeah, it goes 0 to 60 in like 4.3 seconds in the PDK with the Sport Plus mode engaged. And you're like, when you first get into it, you're like, I don't know if I believe them. But after a couple of days with this thing, you're like, oh yeah, they're spot on. Definitely 4.3. But really, once you get to this mode, what you're getting is no squat, dive, pitch, or roll. And that brings us to the entire reason for being of this car. This is the textbook definition of balance. Granted, if your textbook was German. So I spent a lot of time talking about balance here, but how do they build for it? I've been looking around the car for examples, and I found one in a place you're really not supposed to look, where they hide the top mechanism here. Lift this panel, and you see the unibody construction. So in this case, you got this cross member, this aluminum cross member, and it itself is a piece of art. And then it's got the proverbial stack of dimes welding here. And then even where the roll bar hoop meets this cross member, the actual portion that's been cut, it's like finished to a point of almost artistic perfection. Just listen to that. Oh, it burbles. It's just, even around town, you get that throatiness to it, which intoxicating doesn't even begin to cover it. Like, you know how you go to like old car shows and like you get the old Porsche guys like, I don't like those water-cooled Porsches. They don't sound very good. You want a real Porsche, you got to get one of those old ones that are air-cooled. Let me tell you something. If you have driven this thing for a couple of days, I'm not going to say you're going to forget about an air-cooled Porsche, but let's just say you're going to find a newfound love with a water-cooled Porsche. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we've got an incredibly strong case here, but a case for what? If you were to take the same $73,000 US that this cost and go and look for something else, you could find many powerful cars on offer. Or you could have this, the textbook definition of balance as defined by Germany. Now today, July 8th, 2015, the day we are shooting the stand-ups of this car, is an incredibly special day for us. Today is MotoMan's 6th birthday, and we are incredibly grateful that you guys have joined us on this journey over the past 6 years. Now, in those same 6 years, perhaps disproportionately, I have waxed on poetically about Lotus and balance in cars. Well, over those 6 years, this is perhaps the closest thing to balance that I have driven that has not come out of a shed from the southeast of England. And with that, I want to leave you guys with a question. And this question is somewhat in anticipation of what I know your comments are going to be. Like, number one, I know you're going to say this is a girl's car, and let's just get it out of the way. It ain't. And number two, I know many of you are going to say, well, I'd rather have the Cayman. That one, I can't really argue with you. Granted, I love open-top cars, so I would love to have the Boxster simply by virtue of the fact of the folding roof. But let's say, hypothetically, Porsche were to offer an open-top or open-roof option in a Cayman, like a sunroof or a lift-out roof or, wait, maybe a Targa. What if they were to offer this to you? What car would you choose? And not only what car would you choose, the Boxster with a folding roof or this mythical Cayman with some sort of open roof option, why would you choose it? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to say thank you for two things. Once again, thank you for joining us on this journey over the past 6 years, and we look forward to many more years of this journey with you guys. And number two, I want to thank you for joining me today, specifically when I look like a zombie.